podcast in German, I think. Anyway, uh, but thank you guys for joining us. We're glad to be alive and on this channel.
hmm
And what I meant was a live stream on this channel. We're being goofy tonight. But we got a good one that we're going to talk about in this episode. Jason, why don't you go ahead and intro us, man?
Yeah, of course. This week's episode, we're going to be talking about some really cool, interesting stuff that we've kind of come across, which it's a part of the clean energy, initiative that we've been kind of pushing on. I mean, we all have been hearing about it, and I feel like this year, especially this summer, we've been feeling it, the effects of climate change. And so, we kind of this episode we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into what would be needed to create that very sustainable clean energy future, as well as some of the cool technologies that are going to need to be implemented and can be implemented to really make it all work and stuff like that. So, we're going to be talking about cool stuff about like nuclear waste. What do we do with that kind of stuff, right? Because nuclear power, in some ways, can be a clean energy source if we use it right. So we're going to get into that, which is going to be really cool. There's some really interesting stuff that we're going to talk about there. We're also going to talk about the renewable energies, right? So like your wind, your solar. What do we do with that excess energy? Because it sounds weird, but sometimes you can produce far more energy than your community is actually going to use. What do you do with that excess energy, right? So we're going to talk about some of the solutions that can be implemented, that we're going to implement in the future, that we're going to need to implement in the future to truly move not just our nation, but our world into this really cool clean energy. So we got some really amazing stuff to talk about.
Yeah,
I cannot wait, and you
me
guys
neither.
are gonna love it, man.
It was a great intro, man. And also,
Of course.
you said not just our nation, but it is mostly our nation that is kind of the issue. But there are some other ones
Yeah.
for sure. We're going to talk about from the perspective of two Americans right here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, want to announce we are now live on TikTok, man.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. We're live on TikTok. We're dumping some videos on there, some exclusive content. We want you all to check it out. Just search the Catch Up Podcast, and you should find us on there.
Mm-hmm.
Brand new. Give us a follow. We're having a blossom new channel that we'd love y'all to jump on and help support us from the jump. So, yeah, with that said, let's go ahead and smack into it. I'm gonna slap. Hold on.
Smack into it.
Uh,
A little bit more violent than
yeah, well, that's going on the recorded version. Screw it.
yeah, it worked.
Um, all right, here we go. Three, two, one. What's going on, everybody? I'm John,
And I'm Dennison.
and this is the catch up. Man, you brought the most delicate. I said, I'm John. You're like, and I'm Dennison.
Hey man, I'm just trying to be smooth.
I feel that.
You know
It's like your pinky out on that one, man. You're like, and I'm
exactly.
Dennison.
And I'm Dennison. Yeah.
Oh yeah, some
When
Barry
in
wine.
doubt, pinky out, man.
Yeah, some Barry wine action, man. So okay, here we go. Three, two, one. All right, before we jump into this topic, I want to remind you guys of the three best ways to support this show. Number one. Okay, well, I'm gonna be interested when we get to three here. Number one, leave us a rating and a review. Or subscribe if you like us. Wherever you're listening, wherever you're watching, there is a version for all three of those interactions. And whether you subscribe or not, every rating and review really helps us get out in front of more potential listeners and helps us also be able to learn how we can improve. Number two, a mouse and a play or no, an Xbox controller. All right. Well, number two is jump on the live stream with us. We are live every Thursday night on Facebook and on YouTube. Those are, if you're listening on the audio version, those are links down in the bio. We go live and gives you a great opportunity to interact with us in real time as we discuss these topics. And we'd love to hear your what you're talking about and your thoughts. And number three, the whole time he's preparing, two Cybertrucks and a wallet. Yeah, that's what it's going to take for even one Cybertruck is your entire wallet. Number three, if you want to support us monetarily, speaking of money, we got some good and yes, some clean merch over on our special shop that you can access at the link below wherever you're listening, wherever you're watching. We got, yeah, that's right, t-shirts, hats to keep you cool during the summer. We got long sleeves in case you want to prevent sunburns. We got phone cases, and we got mugs, special coffee mugs to give you that energy boost to go out and enjoy the summer fun. Yeah. So with all that out of the way, let's go and jump into this this topic. We've been in the podcast. This should come as no surprise. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So we're both really excited to speak about this topic. And I want to give my personal opinion on nuclear waste specifically. It seems that in our country there's been a large um, fear spread for decades about nuclear power, nuclear waste. Anytime you see discussion about either of these two things, it's how to make it safe, how to store the waste safely, how to even keep these things online safely.
Mm-hmm.
But really, where that stemmed from was the Cold War and shutting down nuclear power plants during the Cold War, things like that. But it really came from the fear of nuclear fallout, nuclear, widespread nuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
When honestly, those things are incredibly separate. Now, yes, there is the fear of Chernobyl. There's the fear of, would you say, Denison, Fukushima?
Yeah, the Fukushima
Yes.
disaster that happened, of course.
Which came from a tsunami, which came from a massive earthquake, a historic earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
These things are not normal. These are very, very fantastic outliers. And really, even those two incidents are no more widespread than coal power plant issues or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, really, it seems like this slept on technology that really had more information in its favor in the 60s, that even that information hasn't changed now. It's just not being promoted, right?
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's so I think, all that stuff that happened is what kind of put a really bad taste in everyone's mouth when it came to nuclear power and what we can actually do. As I said earlier in our intro, nuclear power can be one of the best clean, sustainable energies that we can have out there. Um, because, okay, so I'm going to do a really quick little top level, and then I want to jump back in. I want to have you jump back in about the nuclear waste stuff. But so the way our current grid kind of works in general, right? Because of course we're having to generate power. There's usually still something that is considered like a baseline, right? Every state, as well as every like sector of grids or whatever like that, because in the United States, our grid is actually divided up into different grids.
Sure.
Like there's a West Coast grid, there's an East Coast grid, and then Texas is by itself, kind of doing their own weird thing. Um, and so, um, but for the most part, there's usually a baseline. So there's some sort of baseline energy providing resource, right? I think in Texas, the baseline is natural gas, right? It's our baseline. It's what we use to sustain the minimum amount of power. And then everything else is used to ramp up, right? So you're going to ramp up energy using coal power plants. You're going to ramp up energy using solar. wind, stuff like that. Um, and in some states or some grids, it can be more coal power plants or your baseline, and then so on and so forth. Um, so nuclear energy, the reason why you want to have a baseline is that your energy demand ebb and flows, right? It doesn't just um it's not a consistent thing, right? You're going to have, because at nighttime, right, you're going to be probably utilizing energy probably some of the most amounts, especially in the summertime, right? Because you want to stay cool, everybody wants to have their AC on and stuff like that. Or even if you have like the lights on, you're watching TV, you're going to draw more power in.
Right.
um or say you're coming home from work, right? And everybody's coming home from work and everyone is um, starting the process of cooking and doing laundry and all sorts of stuff like that. So, of course, you're going to have your higher demand. And then, of course, you go off to work, you're going to turn your AC off, whatever, and your demand's going to drop. So, that's the reason why you need to have a baseline energy. So that way, even if um, your demand lowers, you still have a nice, even keel amount of energy ready to go just in case something goes down or you're not able to ramp up as quickly as possible. So, nuclear energy is a great resource that can be used when it comes to fully moving over to sustainable energy sources like solar and wind. Um, so that's the reason why we really want to push that. And I think there's a lot of demystifying that needs to be done when it comes to nuclear energy that I feel like we are starting to finally start to have that conversation. I think it was just a few uh, maybe a few years ago, the EU passed a bill essentially, or like a deal that made nuclear power a considered as a green energy source. And so it helps ramp up production of more nuclear power stations that have been for the longest time, especially in the United States, been being decommissioned rather than new ones coming online and stuff like that. So I just kind of wanted to put that into perspective, just because it makes a little bit more sense on why nuclear power is so important, um, and our move to more sustainable energy sources.
Right. Um, and did you say there was a question you were going to ask me or no?
Yes. Well, what I wanted to ask, though, I wanted to ask you is, um, within this kind of same push to that the EU passed for nuclear energy to be considered a green energy. I wanted to know your thoughts on the in that same process. They also added natural gas as a new renewable or as a green energy, which is kind of controversial. I wanted to kind of get your take on that. What do you feel when it comes to that, as well as what were your, before we kind of started doing some more research into this, what were your some of your fears when it came to nuclear power in general, like at first, like before jumping into any of this?
Well, when I was younger, I kind of drank the Kool Aid that everybody else was pouring out. That nuclear power is dangerous, and that we're at risk due to things like Chernobyl and um, and Fukushima. Now, I don't have an answer for everything,
Hmm.
but I do believe, as to every reason why nuclear is talked against, but I do believe a lot of it is because the government is largely funded by large oil companies. And the fact is, these nuclear power plants, if widespread enough, if put online, could easily put out coal plants, um, put out any other, even natural gas, right? Which is
Hmm.
a much safer alternative to to coal, coal powered electricity, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
natural gas has its problems too. That it's easy to leak. It costs a lot. I think is one of the bigger issues. It can, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's also when those leaks happen, it's super combustible. Um, and those leaks happen more frequently than nuclear leaks, right? So when I was really young, I definitely thought, man, nuclear power, is just not a good idea. But when you really do the research, which I would say for me began a while ago, we have a very large reactor here in Kansas
Mm-hmm.
that you never hear talked about. Why do you never hear that talked about, right? We're talking about something that could power a large portion of the Midwest if brought up to full power, right?
Mm-hmm. Which is crazy.
And yeah, and to me, I think it's a marketing scam against, or scheme, I should say, against those type of technologies.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my opinion. I think that I do see how this could be super effective, and I know one company talked about doing tiny reactors. So
Mm.
think
Yep,
of
I heard about that.
yeah, so like think about the 5G um, that towers that are controlling our brains. Uh, I don't believe that. I don't believe that TikTok. Don't listen to that. I believe no, I don't believe that at all. I think it's funny the conspiracy theories, but I do think that they're on the whole more safe than other options. People
Mm-hmm.
have to know what they're doing with them. But even
Mm-hmm.
a smaller reactor put throughout the US, that's a lower risk but a higher gain. And then you talk about the nuclear waste and the potentials it has, which I know that you were going to say something about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, the nuclear waste I think is another one of the other oppositions that people have when it comes to nuclear energy is that the waste, it's like, wow, why do you want to create like all these, nuclear reactors when they create so much waste and we don't know what to do with them, and they last forever, right? That's one of the biggest headlines that you see is like, oh, nuclear waste, you have to hold it for like, you know 2 decades, 3 decades, or something similar to that,
Longer than
because
that, right? Like hundreds of years.
yeah, it is. It's technically like hundreds and hundreds of years and stuff like
Yeah,
that. Um, it's like, well, you can't just fill it up in like a mountain or whatever like that. Because I think one of the biggest storage places that we have is actually like in a mountain.
that's right.
Um,
They carved into the side of the mountain to put it down below to lower its chances of infecting anybody else.
mm-hmm.
Or
uh,
and also for security, right? So
yep,
people wouldn't break in. It's a highly guarded area, if I remember correctly.
it is, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah, not 100% sure on that, but I do believe that is right because think about what people could do with nuclear waste if they had it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right.
If it was in the wrong hands, right? I mean, first of all, that's what happened to the Joker in the first Batman movie.
I mean, he didn't get dumped into nuclear waste.
He fell into a vat of radioactive waste, and that was the original
No, it
Joker.
was it wasn't a radioactive waste. It was like some acid thingy.
You know what, man? Okay.
You're gonna Google it.
No, I'm definitely not typing that into Google right now. Meanwhile, you keep talking.
um, so yeah, nuclear waste is one of those really big um things that everybody's a little bit scared of. But little did you know that back when nuclear energy was kind of in its prime, right? And then where everybody was like, "Hey, let's do it. Let's do let's make all the nuclear reactors, and it'll push us into this newer future, newer greener future, and blah blah blah." Way back in the 50s or whatever like that. Um, around that time, there was a technology that was being developed, and I think it actually technically came out at that time, which was using nuclear waste to as fuel
Yep.
for nuclear reactors. So it sounds crazy, right? But you create nuclear waste by doing, um, the reactions and such, and then you go around and turn that nuclear waste into more fuel, and then you throw it back in there and you keep on going. It's like what is it, Mr. Fusion from Back to the Future. You just take all your garbage and throw it in there, and bam, it works. um,
It's a perfect example, dude.
yeah. so um so yeah, that technology was developed and pushed, but when Chernobyl happened, it kind of put a damper on things. No one really likes to say like, "Hey guys, we can do more reactors," when this huge nuclear react disaster happened or whatever like that. No one wants to just be like, "Yeah, let's do that." Um, so we just kind of did the normal thing of, let's just put it in a barrel and put it somewhere that we don't want to see, where the sun don't shine, and then just call it a day. Out of sight, out of mind.
It just
um,
sounds so comic book villain when you say it that way. You know what I mean?
I
It
mean,
just,
that's kind of what happened
yeah,
for the
I
most
know.
part.
It sounds so improbable that you would take radioactive waste, be like, all right, so who's the guy putting it in the barrel? You know, that guy was like, God dang it. I was just going to quit yesterday.
Yeah, exactly.
I waited one day too long. Man, yeah, jeez. So, thing about radioactive waste is it has a lot of potential to be recycled and to create energy. And I know that we've seen studies that say that that radioactive waste could power if we took all the radioactive waste in the United States,
hmm
which consider how few nuclear power plants we have compared to coal and others, if we took all of the nuclear waste and recycled it, we could power our entire country for 150 years, right?
hmm
100 to 150 years.
It's crazy.
Now, who wouldn't want to do that, you know?
hmm
And that's already recycled. And so I obviously I don't know what the recycling process looks like. I
hmm
do know it's expensive and I do know it takes a lot of infrastructure.
Yep.
But I gotta imagine it can't be even more dangerous in the eyes of the general public than what the main process that created that waste looks like.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. And the other good thing about it is, sure, yes, you do technically, even after using the recycled nuclear waste, you still do get waste product out of that. But of course, you can continue that process and churn through it until you get to a point to where you just can't essentially get any more material out of that waste, because that's essentially what the whole recycling process is, right? You get that waste, you grab whatever materials that you can out of that, and then you throw that back into the reactor, and then boom, you're doing it again, and then you keep on just kind of extracting down to like it getting to a really small level. But the good thing about doing that too is, sure, you do still have to store that waste, but the waste, the storage time reduces dramatically from, I think, hundreds of years to, like, I think it's like a few decades,
Mhm.
um, which is so much better, so much cleaner, and it also means that there's less problems that we have to worry about. Because it's essentially, you're diluting it down to a point to where it's really not as scary anymore, right?
Yeah.
As what we currently have. So, um,
Well, and to put that in simple terms, you could take it, recycle it, take it from millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years needing to sit before it won't affect anybody. You recycle it, use it again, a couple times later, all of a sudden it's just maybe 100 years that it has to sit, and then it won't affect anyone.
mhm.
So that's already better for the environment.
Yep,
You
exactly.
But also, with that said, on the whole, especially if you include recycling with it. nuclear power is safer, more effective, and cheaper in the long run. I think that's when I see,
Mm-hmm.
uh, if you get past all of the common misconceptions with nuclear power, it's dangerous, it could explode, cause a nuclear bomb, stuff like that. That's not true. You get past that, then the argument typically is it's expensive.
Yep.
It is expensive.
It
Yep,
is.
yep. The maintenance is not cheap.
Yeah,
In
exactly. And
time,
building them is not cheap either.
absolutely, yeah, both of those things. Over time, it's got to pay for itself, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I mean, your traditional nuclear reactor is going to last somewhere around 20 to, I think, 40 years is the max, technically, where it's supposed to be. That's the traditional lifespan. Um, and so that already, you know, if it say takes, I don't know, I will say that is one other thing. Since we have so many regulations and stuff like that, which is a good thing, but it does slow down the progression of creating it. I think currently, um, it takes around 10 years for a nuclear reactor to be built and get up to standards or up to speed, essentially, to where it's producing power and it's actually actually doing stuff. So it does take a long time, and there is a lot of money that can be it's a cost a lot of money for you to get to that point. But with proper government incentives and proper government assistance and um, just good laws behind it, we could probably reduce one, the cost of creating nuclear power plants, as well as we can reduce the time that it takes for them to get up and operational. So again, it's just we need to kind of move ourselves or push ourselves into that mindset of the new way that we use nuclear energy can be so much better. We have so much more research, we have so much more um, knowledge about how nuclear energy works, how the process works, as well as safety standards that we can use to implement to create a far safer reactor than we could, you know, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so, and not to mention, right, we can even get close. We're already getting closer and closer. Each year we're getting closer to fusion power. And so that can also be another incredibly sustainable resource. Um,
Which
so I
fusion is based off nuclear reaction, right?
It's a different process. So the process that we use for nuclear reactors is fission. So it's breaking atoms to apart, right?
Hmm.
Fusion is slamming those atoms together and they fuse together to make one nice little deal. It's essentially the same reaction that you see in the sun.
Okay, gotcha. So it'd
So
be,
one's breaking it apart and one's put them together.
and that's not something we have access to yet. Is that right?
It's something that we can do, but to a degree to where it's sustainable power. No. Uh,
Okay.
the latest experiment did actually produce, because for the years, right, we've been able to create that reaction where it does do fusion, but the amount of energy that we're having to consistently put into it to keep that reaction going is not feasible. So we're not getting we're just pouring tons of energy into it and not getting anything, not enough out for it to actually be sustainable and stuff like that. I think earlier this year, might have been a little bit earlier last year, we actually were able to create a reaction that produced more energy than we put into it, which is a huge breakthrough. Now, of course, this was experiments. This was us just trying stuff until it stuck. So it's still at the very early stages, but at least now we have a building block that we can move on to. So fusion power is getting closer, but it's still, I think one of the I was watching a video about it, and they were saying, fusion power is like 30 years off, and it's
Oh, wow.
always 30 years off,
Oh, is
right?
it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I would say that we are now probably closer to that true 30-year figure, because
It's hard to believe.
it
Still,
is.
it's hard to believe it's still that far off. You know.
Yeah, yeah, and who knows? Technology is advancing at such a incredibly fast rate that it
True.
could be a much slower or a much faster time. But yeah,
AI could figure it out tomorrow, dude.
yeah, who knows?
Man, that's wild.
Yeah.
Well, um, the thing I will say is this: with nuclear power, I think tiny reactors across the country would be cheaper and
Mm-hmm.
potentially less of a risk. So it's already like a point 0.2 risk, and you make it like a 0.18 risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I just want everyone to let go of those um, fears that there'll be a huge atomic bomb like explosion or a leak that would just kill everyone around it. Because the fact is, it's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at, they've done multiple studies on the air quality, water quality surrounding nuclear power plants
Mm-hmm.
all over the world, and even the water that travels through. Because, see, nuclear power plants have to be built near a body of water because that's what keeps them cool
Mm-hmm.
so they don't explode. Um, and even the water that travels through the plant is still cool, right? And still not only cool, but still healthy. It
Mm-hmm.
has no effect on the environment. You can't
Mm-hmm.
say that about coal plants. You can't say that about natural gas plants. I mean, and those are already a risk in and of themselves. And I mean, even things like trains passing through Ohio that fall on the side and become a greater natural issue to the
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem than a nuclear power plant would be on the whole. Denson and I talked about this off camera, but like I said earlier, Fukushima was the cause of an earthquake, you know, and Chernobyl was the result of negligence.
Mm-hmm.
These things are not like, oh, we can't control it, it's going out of control. Like, it's not like that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Yeah.
just rare, wrong place, wrong time type of situations.
Yeah, yeah. We're not playing Russian roulette every time that we start a nuclear fission reaction. We're not just like, all right, I hope we're getting power this time.
Every time to use Russian roulette when we're talking about Chernobyl.
Yeah,
Uh, and say nuclear. What you say? Nuclear. I can't. I
nuclear.
can't do a George Bush, dude. Nuclear. Anyway, that's as good as it gets. um, but with that said, I think that's kind of the lasting message on this. I know you wanted to go to wind and
Mm.
solar and talk about that as well, and especially what's done with the excess energy created from, or what could be done with the excess energy created from those two different methods, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no. So yeah, moving on. So when since this whole episode is about a more sustainable future, right? Everyone loves to say that. Everyone talks about green energy, that and this.
It's a
Um,
buzzword, man.
it is, and everybody loves to talk about, get you some solar panels on your roof and do this and blah blah blah. And it's true. Those are amazing steps, and those are things that we need to do. But I think the one thing that, just like with nuclear energy and being able to recycle the waste that is created out of that, we have to do the same thing similarly, at least, when it comes to excess power that is generated from some of the more um, on and off again renewable resources like solar and wind.
What would
And
that
it's
look like to you, though? Because it's a very
so
process.
yeah, no, I mean, so for me, from what I've been reading and I've watched videos on and stuff like that, um, is just a complete upgrade of our infrastructure when it comes to the grid. And it's something that it doesn't get talked about a lot. We just keep saying, like, yeah, just put on more, just create more wind turbines and create more solar panels, and boom, we got power.
Problem solved. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Or we'll say like, just make big old battery packs and stuff, and that is a great way to do it. But the thing is that it gives us so many other opportunities to be able to harness that excess power. Because yes, um, you're always going to have excess power when it comes to these on and off again power sources, right? It's similar to kind of like what I was talking about when it comes to that baseline power, right? So, right now in our example, we have the baseline power now of nuclear power. Then we're going to have in a traditional system, right? You would have, like, say, natural gas or whatever like that. And then you would use, as demand ramps up, you would turn on power facilities like coal, whatever. So, when it comes to a green sustainable grid or future or whatever like that, we would do it differently, right? Because you can't just turn on the sun, nor can you just like turn on the wind and be like, all right, guys, we're doing
Right.
it.
It's on.
Yeah,
Bouncing
exactly.
across the field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what we need to do is work smarter with that type of energy generation resource. And so, when I say revamp our grid, I mean like having more interconnected grids. So, not just because the big thing about it is that the cool thing is it could be rainy in Seattle, but it can be super sunny in California. And if you
Mhm.
have these huge power lines, right? Some really good power lines, I mean, like big old thick cables, right? Um, to transmit this power that's happening. So super sunny in California right now. California's got all the energy it needs. Let's move that energy over to Seattle
Mm,
because they need some love, so let's give them some power, right?
I
So
see where
having
you're with this.
big big power cables that we can run all of that excess power out, so we're sharing it better, right? Or even say it's super windy in Kansas, right? But um it's not windy right now in, I don't know, New York or whatever like that. Well, let's
Mm.
go ahead and move some of that excess wind power from Kansas because they got tons of it, right? Hey, it's windy in Texas too. But anyway, let's move some of
Man,
that.
I was like, what? You're gonna say, oh, maybe we could create something based on wheat power too. Like,
Nah,
man,
man, that's corn power, man. Gotta get them
no, that's in
cornfields
Nebraska. We're known for wheat, bro. Man.
going. But yeah, no, you got that excess wind power, and you can move that you can transmit that over to, say, New York or something similar to that. So it's that kind of interconnectivity that we need to kind of start to work on, and it's a infrastructure that we just don't have. Like, our current grid is an amazing machine that we have created. A lot of people don't think of it that way, but it is, right? It's an incredible, it's almost like magic essentially,
Right.
because of just how we just somehow make power just get to everybody's places, even when power isn't being generated at certain times or something like that. We just have power ready to go. um and so we have to reimagine and rethink our grid that same way when it comes to renewables. let's just, if something's working here, something's working there, and we've got excess here and there, let's move it around. Let's do some trading, and become a far more, I guess, like friendlier. So yeah, getting back to everything. So bigger transmission lines, right, to move that power everywhere, every which way. That also you can also utilize batteries for storage. So that's great for times when the whole United States, right? It's nighttime. Um, we can store, say, that excess energy that we had in, say, during the daytime. We can store that in big old battery packs, right? And that becomes now our nice little baseline that we can use, as well as, say, if we were going to stay on the same example, nuclear energy. Um, we can have those both working together and sustain us over the nighttime, and then when it comes to daytime we can ramp things back up, or even if there's wind that's going on at that same time at nighttime, because I know in Texas at night it gets windier, right?
Yeah.
So you can use that excess wind power somewhere else where it's not, or whatever like that. So having that community and creating our grid in such a way that it can actually sustain that is, um, huge amount of money that is needed to be pushed into our grid, because, um, and we're not even talking about the increase of electricity demand that has already started,
Right.
um, because of everything's being moved over to electric, right? Of course,
R-
it's vehicles that are being moved over to electric, and then other facilities, as well as other processes and stuff like that, to be more green, are being moved over to more fully electric things, which means that we're going to need a grid that's far more robust than where it is currently.
Right. So I see where you're coming from on that. I had two things I
Mm,
was going to ask you about in opposition to that,
mm,
opposition to your idea. You answered one of them. This would be in preparation for the higher demand.
yeah.
Because to my knowledge, at least up until recently, or maybe if not currently, um, wind power particularly does not create enough energy to really power metropolitan areas for a sustained length of time, you know. And so that may change as they improve their technology and as the demand increases.
Mm-hmm.
But that was one thing I had to ask about that. Now I still have another thing that I'll come back to. But Aaron jumped in the comments. Good friend of the show, Aaron Wandra. Glad to have you on the comments, man. He says if it's more interconnected, is it easier to attack? Now this
Mm-hmm.
is a worst case scenario kind of thing, but also why decisions were made, like to keep our current power grid east from west, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to have these little separations so the country can still function.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, what do you think about that?
I guess for me, my thing is, sure, I guess in some ways you could say that it would make it easier for attack. But at the same time, I don't think it's any different. I don't think it makes it any different than how we currently have it. Because, for instance, right, sure, if someone were to attack the East Coast grid, um, well, that sucks for the East Coast. But technically, but you have your West Coast that's, they're still good to go, whatever. Everybody's in great shape. But um, I feel like if we have a more interconnected grid, if the East Coast goes down or something happens to their grid, I don't think it will fully affect. I think there's a way that we can properly insulate each side, but actually have that interconnectivity without it affecting anything like that, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that's the reason why I don't know. I guess when I think of attack, right, I don't, especially when it comes to our electric grid, I don't foresee a single attack, even in our current state, happening just to one grid. I see
Sure.
it happening to everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So, for instance, right, a while back we talked about EMP weapons, right? And the fact that in the future there's even a possibility of having like an EMP satellite, right? Um, if that, say, there was something similar to that, which is electromagnetic pulse, which is essentially something that can render all electronics essentially useless. It essentially overloads the system and then it just shuts down everything, right? If we were, say, to get attacked with something similar to that, because that's most likely what they would use, right? You take that down and then boom, you can do all sorts of things without anybody being able to communicate or anything like that. It's perfect for that. Kind of creepy, but whatever. Anyway, if someone were to, if they were to do that, they wouldn't just target one grid, they would target the whole United States because I mean, it's a lot faster for you to do. If you do the whole United States, boom, you're good to go and you can just kind of like jump in as fast as possible. If you have one of the grids, say currently, that you turn off, but you have the rest of them, sure, there's going to be a little bit less communication there, but there's a much faster process of being able to get things back going on one side, or on, I guess, say your other grids, feeding into your down grid or whatever like that, can happen a lot faster than um, the essentially it becomes a moot point when it comes to attacks because you're going to usually do things as quickly as possible and you want to hit as many things as possible, right? Usually, if it's some sort of, I don't know, nuclear bombs or whatever like that, they're going to use multiple spots. They're going to hit a lot of population areas. It's not going to be just one spot. So that's the reason why I don't feel like it's a that big of a deal. It makes that much of a difference.
Right. Well, also, dare I relay this on air? I'm just quoting here. Aaron said, "Watch out for the China." um, he said that to the bowl in the China closet. Watch out for the China. So, it's actually a bowl, not like a bowl with horns. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah. See, I
Like a
didn't know
bowl.
that until recently. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that is.
I bet a lot of people didn't know that. Anyway, um, what was I gonna say? Oh, well, the thing I would say is, attack a possibility, yes, but also just malfunction, damage, something like that allows it to not work as it's supposed to. You'd want to have relays or backups that allow that power to transport across state lines, just as you would now,
Hmm.
to local areas. But the third thing I was going to say in questioning of that, each state has its own rules and regulations and taxation of solar running off of solar power, or running
Hmm.
off of wind power. Now, I guess if it's on a state level, obviously that'd be different. Um, so yeah, I don't know what that would look like now that I say it out loud. It would have to be a rewrite of our rules, laws, procedures, etc.
Yeah,
But
yeah, no,
as it should be.
yeah, it would be more of a federal thing that would need to be a federal blanket kind of thing that would need to happen to properly make this type of super grid work, right? Or smart grid in some ways, which is
Super.
essentially probably closer to what we would want, right?
Yeah, I like it. I think you made a good case for that. A solid argument for it. Yeah, I do think that we're a way to go. Less so for solar. Solar is definitely getting to a point where it's in higher demand. but
Yep.
wind has a ways to go to be efficient enough to power things for more than, a day or even a week, which a week is good. Don't get me wrong, but got ways to go in that department. Nuclear energy is the answer. You can get at me anytime you want. I'm going like Skip Bayless on this. Come on. You can come at me anytime you want on this. I'll die on this hill. Uh, okay, Aaron says, do you trust the solar companies that want to put it on your house to cheapen your own electric bill? Honestly, yeah. Although I will say though, I think I don't have any distrust for them. I'll put it like that. Um, but my thing is, if someone came to you and I know the price difference would be a lot, but I think it would be a waste to let someone. I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I don't know. That's too much of a hot take. I'm not comfortable with making. You really have to weigh the options of what's more cost effective because most likely they'd install that solar panel on your house for either free or a lowered price, but then you'd have to pay a monthly fee for it. Whereas if you install it yourself, that's a lot up front, but then everything after that is yours, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, so I mean, currently there's like two different ways to do solar panels. You can There are certain states that allow you to lease solar panels, so that is a thing. And then there are other states that allow you to purchase solar panels, and you would, of course, do it through this company. They would put it on there, and then at the end of it, it's yours. Some people will lump that loan that they do into their mortgage. So then that way, it's essentially a part of the mortgage, and it's a part of the house, and then it can also be a part of the home value when it comes to selling your home. So yeah, I think it's fine because a lot of times the reason why it's cheaper, some of this is government incentives, as well as some of it is just because we've made solar technology a lot cheaper in general to produce. So I think as long as there's proper rules and regulations, I don't think it's that much of an issue. Now, one thing I do have an issue with that is something that came to mind that I didn't think about is when it comes to solar panels, like Aaron said, uh, that you're using on your home to cheapen your electricity bill, right? So certain electricity providers have it to where if you put solar panels on your roof, of course, it's reducing the amount of electricity that you're actually pulling from the grid. So that's going to lower your bill. But you can also have it to where you can charge it back to that electric company. So essentially, you can get it to a point to where you are either making money from your solar panels or you are not paying an electric bill. Um, Now, my only concern that comes to play in that scenario, right? If everyone did this, right? So if, tons of people are just doing this,
Yeah.
is the scary part is that some of that of your bill actually goes towards the maintenance of the grid, just in general. So the more people that we move consistently over to a
Solar.
yeah, to
The
solar and it's
higher
more
that'll be.
self-sustainable, the lower the grid health is
Yeah,
or
so the higher
potentially is.
bill will be for it, right?
Exactly, because what will happen, right, is for people who can't, it becomes one of those differentiators between the haves and haves nots because what's going to happen is the power company is going to say, cool, we're not charging these people, but we still got to make up the difference. So now the people who can afford it, the people who are already struggling, are now going to get charged more to be able
Mm,
to make up the difference of the people who are already kind of not having to pay, right? So it's like the people who have the means already are benefiting even more from being able to have the means to be able to do that. And so it kind of creates kind of a classism kind of deal. So
yeah.
there is some navigation that I think we will need to do eventually
Sure.
when it comes to that.
And as always, that's just called capitalism, baby.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. Man, yeah, let's figure out a title. Aaron says also Team Nuclear, and let's figure out title. I'm assuming you mean title the music streaming service.
Yeah.
Uh, that's what I'm gonna go with.
Hmm.
But man, I gotta say, yeah, I am Team Nuclear as well. I think it's the all around best option. Um, Tidal power. Oh, dude.
Oh,
Um,
that is a thing. That
yes.
is.
Okay. Yes, like waves indeed. Oh, like waveforms, dude. uh, so no, yeah, tidal power is a great answer. Possibly better than wind and
Well, because you can have offshore wind, which is actually better,
yeah, but
with
yes, you can get
more efficient blades too.
right. Yeah, you can get power two different ways through that method,
Hmm.
um, by collecting wind and collecting the power of the motion of the ocean collected inside that and stored, which is great. I mean, that's a never-ending power. That
Yep.
is something that will never be obstructed either. And if things keep going the way they are, we'll only get more powerful.
Exactly.
um,
Oh, you also have geothermal.
oh
A lot
yeah,
of
you
people
do.
forget that. You know.
That you do, which is another great option. Also expensive, uh, if I remember right, but
Yep.
really,
It is.
but a lot of them are, and I think it just takes that investment, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
they get cheaper as we put more money into it, just like coal and some of the more fossil fuel staples that we have weren't cheap at first, but as we put more and more money into it, we got the cost farther and farther down to becoming, the go-to, right? Same with solar power. Solar power has, in most cases, become cheaper than fossil fuels. So like your coal power and stuff like that. We actually talked about this, I think, a year ago or whatever like that, because that was when the tipping point happened, right? When solar now became cheaper to do than your coal power plants and stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, those are great. I mean, again, all of these is going back to that rudimentary way of how we create power in the first place. It's we're using this energy that gets created to heat some water up, essentially,
yeah,
to to create steam to drive that turbine, and then boom, there's your power.
well,
It's
that's true.
so
One way
funny.
or another, it all involves water. Even geothermal energy involves water.
Exactly. We're using that thermal energy to heat up the water to turn into steam and then
Yeah,
power that turbine.
which geothermal energy is just the heat of the earth. So
Hmm.
if you talk about sustainable and things are always, well, I guess not always constant, but if you go
For the
deep
most
enough,
part.
it would be mostly constant.
Hmm.
Um, is the geothermal, but then yeah, that and the tidal power, those are great ways to do it. You know, those and nuclear, man. I mean, one is not necessarily man-made, but a man-made discovery on the quantum level,
Hmm.
and the rest are natural, and you gotta love it. So, um, we'll have to see where this all takes us in the future. But I think we made our case for sustainable and renewable energy.
Hmm.
I think we had a great discussion on this.
Yeah.
So, thank you guys for jumping in on the discussion. Thank you for leaving your comments. Please let us know what you think about our show in a rating or review, and subscribe if you like us. If you want to support us monetarily, check out our shop in the link below.
Hmm.
So, I think we had a good one on this. Don't forget to follow us on TikTok. We're live on TikTok now. It's at the Catch Up Cast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch up with you next week.